So, Stephen King kind of operates on this scale of weird, where you'll have, like, where your average author... So Stephen King kind of just operates on this scale of weird, where you'll have your average author, this is like their most weird. It's like, you know, they'll get up there, they'll get up to here, and you're like, that's kind of weird, right? That's odd. What? This is a bold choice. Then there's your average king. Average king is about where most authors will get their weirdest, if we're being perfectly honest. Here's your average king. Wolves of the Kala, the last Dark Tower book I read, really kind of exceeded well beyond where I thought Stephen King's weirdness would be willing to go. We had like Doctor Doom werewolf robots. That's odd. Now, this one, the book I'm about to review, The Song of Susannah, Stephen King decided to just decided to get weird with it, man. Just got a little odd. Hey look, I created modern art. The Song of Susannah by Stephen King is the second to last Dark Tower book. I'm almost there. And I went into here with high expectations because the Dark Tower for me started a bit weak with the Gunslinger, which is pretty much accepted among the Dark Tower fans, where the weakest book is the first, and has had a slow incline of success since then. I've enjoyed the books just more and more. Crowning achievement so far was Wolves of the Kala, or The Wolves of the Kala. Really loved that one. It was just a kooky, interesting, bold book by Stephen King, which to me had one of his craziest elements ever of introducing the book Salem's Lot within the Dark Tower and a character from Salem's Lot. So I was like, oh snap, we got some real Stephen King multiverse crossovers. And for those of you unaware, pretty much every Stephen King book is interconnected. And that was fascinating. Cool. He outdid himself here. This is going to be a basically impossible book to review without getting into mild spoilers. So if you want to know absolutely nothing about Stephen King's The Song of Susannah, I'll give you completely spoiler-free for a bit. Then we're going to have to get into story elements later on. And we're going to have to start with what I didn't like, because there were a few choices here for The Song of Susannah that did grate on me a bit. Most of all, this feels like a bit of a filler book. There is some progression that happens with the main plot, things that are setting up the final book, but it's not enough to really justify, in my opinion, the existence of this full story. And for me, what seems like happened here was Stephen King decided that I'm going to have the second to last book in this fantasy series. For the last book, I'm going to have to really focus on the main story and really deliver the ending of this series I've worked so hard on. So for the second to last book, I'm just going to go weird, wild, and have some fun. And I have a mixed reaction to that. Some things are absolutely awesome from that, and some things are not. We'll get more into that in a minute. But yeah, this one for me, like, Dark Tower's been wacky and weird, and as we're approaching the last, Stephen King has just gotten wild, and then we're gonna, it seems like, maybe settle with the final book. We're following two plot lines. As I mentioned, one very much so kind of just setting up the last book, building up the final things we need to get there, while the other one, still relevant, but is much more so, it feels like a side quest where Stephen King's being a bit wild. My other big issue with this book is that it has the infamous Stephen King ending where things just stop. It's a cliffhanger, but it's not necessarily an earned one. It's just things are building up to happening and then they are done. And that grates with me. I'm not the biggest fan of that, Stephen King. I want to have some catharsis. There needs to be a nice little arc within each one, and instead, very frequently in Dark Tower, it's been just this rolling hill of let's just get to the end, and every book doesn't necessarily have a nice little bow at its ending. But if you're a Stephen King fan, you are used to that abuse. You are not surprised to hear that, I am sure, and you're probably fine with it. But there were still so many positives that are worth heaping praise on here. The character work, as always, totally brilliant, especially the evolution of Roland. His changes are subtle yet substantial. Consistently, it makes sense. Everyone has so much agency. The relationships are so wonderful. Even some of the newer characters really worked for me here. Everything on that level vibed. Clap, clap, clap. The plot, both of them I enjoyed, though in the bigger picture, that's where I kind of have problems with one of them. And the pacing of the book was a bit messy, but not horrendous by any means. So if you want absolutely no spoilers, not even story elements mentioned, my obvious recommendation is to read the Dark Tower series. We, as fantasy fans, are fairly stagnant in what we read in general. We kind of just see a lot of the same tropes, a lot of the same ideas with little twists on them here and there. Stephen King is taking the idea of Lord of the Rings and just giving it the full King treatment, so it's just like an acid trip through a fantasy world, and it's worth your time if you're a big fantasy fan or if you're a Stephen King fan. Both audiences, I think, have a very strong appeal to it. I can't promise you'll love it, but it'll be unlike anything you have experienced before, that I'm sure of. But let's go ahead and transition into talking about some story elements here. The big elephant in the room. This book is notorious for this, and if you've heard of The Dark Tower, someone has probably told you this already, so it's probably not even a spoiler for most of you, but Stephen King himself appears in this story. No, not an author stand-in. Stephen King does do that a lot, where he has a character that's clearly himself, but he's decided to kill the middleman. He's dragged him out back like a rabid dog and shot the middleman in the head. No author stand-in, it's just Stephen King. Literally the author of the book you are reading in the book you are reading, which was foreshadowed in the last book with Salem's Lot being there and the characters there. But this fantasy idea of the Stephen King multiverse is the most spelled out, the most blatant in the pages here that I've ever seen in the Stephen King multiverse, and that is fascinating. That, of course, a lot of people have a very negative reaction to this choice, though, from Stephen King. If you look at the Goodread reviews that are negative, people always mention this, saying it feels like an ego thing or it just completely removed them from the story. I disagree with the ego thing point. It is set up, it serves a purpose, and it doesn't come across egotistical to me, but I give them that it will pull you out of the story. It completely pulled me out for sure, but I get why it happened and I respected it, and it's such a King thing to do, and it's something that I've never seen another author do in this context, so I enjoyed it. I forgave it. I respected it, and I don't think it could be done better than it is done here. If that idea sounds just like repugnant to you as a reader, though, maybe this book is just going to be repugnant to you for that idea, because I do understand how it can really be obnoxious to suddenly have the person writing the book in the book. It's confusing, but hey, it's done well, at least, I feel. Among Dark Tower fans, this book is the most controversial of the series, as I said. It's not the worst overall, but it's the one where people are very polarized on. And it's for everything I've mentioned so far. But now, there's a couple other things that are mentioned here that I can't get into specifics of without spoiling elements, but there's a historical event that is heavily foreshadowed to be part of what they're doing at a certain point and why they leave a thing in a certain place. And as soon as they mentioned that, I had to go look to see when this book was published to see if this was intentional or not. Obviously it was. Dumb of me. I should have just kind of figured that out. But that was a bit jarring, and I've seen some people complain about in their negative reviews as well. And then finally, there is the Stephen King bodily fluid element that is actually very closely tied to the plot this time, whereas previously he's just kind of mentioned pissing and shitting a lot. Now there is another bodily fluid that is integral to the story, and it's kind of like Tarantino's foot fetish. I'm just numb to it. Like, okay, there's gonna be feet, there's gonna be bodily fluids from King. I'm not saying he has a bodily fluid fetish, I'm just saying it's always there. And this one actually was really interesting. That sounds gross and weird, but the way it's tied to the plot and the way it is set up the last book has me 100% hooked. That was the greatest accomplishment of the Song of Susannah. I am bristling to pick up the final entry for Dark Tower because it has set up that ending. It has set up this resolution to a story I've been following for over a year of my life now, maybe closer to 2 years, brilliantly. And I have to know the resolution to this jaw-droppingly strange adventure Stephen King has dragged me through. Overall, I kind of agree with the consensus on this one. It's an odd one out for the Dark Tower series. It's strange. Not everything feels super cohesive. Stephen King was a bit indulgent here, no doubt, but it's not the worst of the series. It's not the best. I'd say it's good, and it has some of the boldest choices I've seen recently. So for that reason, I take my hat off to it, and I, of course, continue to recommend the Dark Tower series. It's just such a wild ride. I've had so much fun with it, and I'm a big King fan, so maybe I'm a bit biased to begin with. Let me know what you think of the Dark Tower series in the comments down below. Let me know what you think of the Song of Susannah and some of the more strange choices as well down there. Please mark spoiler warnings in your comments, always appreciated. But like and subscribe if you have not already. Hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. and have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high-tier Patreon, Midzarin. Thank you so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy some Stephen King. Have a good one, y'all.